Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at Etrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the TruRyde Trailer Suspension Bushings. When doing any suspension work on your camper or RV, your suspension sees a lot of wear and tear just going down the road, and part of that is going to be some wear parts like our bushings here that go in between all of our connection points that do tend to get a little bit worn out. The nylon over time will crack and just break down. So while you're doing any of that suspension work, it might be worth picking up some new nylon bushings and get these in place. That way you have a freshened suspension. It's really going to make sure that there's no major gap between the bolt as it goes through your leaf spring, and that's just going to cut down on any extra movement that doesn't need to be there. This is going to fill that space, making it a little bit more smooth, and it's just going to lessen the wear that's happening on your suspension. Now these are pretty standard for most trailers and RVs, and that standard size is going to be a 9/16 inner diameter, 11/16 outer diameter, and it's going to be 1 3/4 inch long. Now nylon's a great option if you don't have wet bolts, and the way you can determine that is the bolts that you have here. If there's no grease zerks on there, you're going to want to use these nylon, and that's because there's no maintenance. These just, once they wear out, they're a wear item. You can replace them with new ones like we did today. If you do have wet bolts, you're going to want to look at the brass ones, and those are meant to actually be lubricated, so there is maintenance involved with those, basically just lubricating those on a regular interval as you use them. Sometimes these are super easy to get out and also easy to replace and get a new one in, but not always the case. As they do get chewed up over time, sometimes you'll have to fight with them a little bit. And I do have some pointers to help you along no matter what condition they're in. So I'll walk you through that, and that way you can get new bushings put on your camper. Now the first step to get our bushings installed is going to be to jack up your camper or your trailer, and that way we can get the wheels and tires off. We're going to just work on one side at a time. Now we're going to be attacking one side or one axle at a time, and I think the best way to really help to make sure we can get everything out nice and easy and also lift it back in place because it will be under tension is to put a floor jack under the axle, and that's going to support it, and also that's going to allow us to slowly drop it or slowly raise it back into place. And once we have that supported with an 18mm socket, we're going to go ahead and we're going to take off our bolt here. It's just a shoulder bolt, and these are spline. Normally these aren't going to spin, so as long as we get this nut off, we'll be able to hammer this bolt out. Now to get the bolt out, unless you're replacing it with new bolts, what I recommend doing is take that nut, and you're going to want to just put this on the end, just a few threads here, and that's to make sure that we don't hammer or mushroom out the end of the bolt. And so just kind of make this to where it's going to be nice and flat on here, and once we start knocking it loose, it's going to allow it to kind of loosen up and we can get those splines out. Now it might be helpful to put just a little bit of pressure on the jack to raise that up to kind of unspring that tension that's on that bolt. Now you're probably going to be doing the other bushings as well, so if you're getting too much tension on that bolt and you really can't get it to be loose, you can go ahead and take off your shackle bolt, and sometimes that's going to allow us to kind of move this to get that tension off. So I'm just going to get this one taken off here. And then same thing, we're going to try to knock this one loose. And once you kind of feel the gap, sometimes you can pry on that back side there, but you can see here, we got our bolt taken out. I'll go ahead and I'll get this one taken out now. I can see I got that gap there. I can back this nut out a little bit, see if we can't get the rest of it, or just take that flathead and kind of pry on this as you're hitting it. Now at this point, I got it pushed back a little bit, so as I've raised this up, I can start to kind of find where that tension is, and you can see I'm able to kind of get this pulled out by hand. And that's going to get us to where we can attack this bushing. Now, so these bushings actually don't look horrible compared to what I've seen. Some of these can really get misshapen, start to crack and become brittle, and that's where getting these out can be tricky. You may think that just a pair of pliers would get that out, but there's a decent amount of surface area, and there's been a lot of tension that's kind of pressed this really into there. So there's two ways that I recommend to get these out nice and easy. The first one is kind of the general way to do it is a 7/16 socket is small enough to go through the hole on our leaf spring, but large enough to kind of press this out. So just a few quick taps here. Do be careful though. You want to go in as straight as possible, and they may start to kind of deform as you do this, but pretty easy. We can get this one popped out, and you can see it is pretty misshapen here. So to get our new one in, we'll just take this here, and a lot of times you can get this pressed in by hand. Just kind of make sure it's evened up on both sides. If you need to hammer it in, a block of wood against that, nice and squared up to the leaf spring, is going to be a good way to do that. But if you're really struggling with this bushing and you can't get it out, I do have another tip for you. You can take an 11/16 socket, and that's going to be the same diameter as the outside of our bushing. So as long as we go in nice and square with the eyelet on our leaf spring, this is going to just kind of bore this out for us. So I'll run this in, back it out, run it in, and eventually it's going to break it down into pieces that we can easily get this taken out. And then you can see this kind of, the bit will definitely tear up your old bushing, but that's okay. It's going to extract it out. So really in those tough cases where that socket's just not really pushing it out, this is a great way to do it. And if you can't quite get it by hand, you can use a dead blow hammer to lightly knock this in. Again, a block of wood also works really well, but just kind of to persuade this along, make sure it's nice and even. So at this point, we can go ahead and get our new bolts in unless you're doing any other suspension work. Sometimes it is easier to leave your leaves like this and then do your equalizer. So if you want to tackle one or the other, but having that floor jack underneath our axle right now makes it to where to get our shackles back in place is going to be easy. I can just slowly raise that up until we get this all aligned on both sides. And then also again, having that jack to just fine tune this into place is going to be key. So we'll go ahead and we're going to get this put back in place. And a lot of times I'll just hit on the head of the bolt just to kind of get those splines to drive back in. And then we can tighten this down, and that's going to further draw that in. And that was a look and installation of the TruRyde Trailer Leaf Spring Suspension Bushings.